Good afternoon, alien enthusiasts. Stay tuned to the end of the video where I'm going to be rolling out a very special live event. By the spring of 2026, if all goes as it's expected to go, 3I Atlas will be on its way past Jupiter and on its way out of the solar system, having left a confused but very intrigued humanity behind it. That is to say, assuming that we don't divert the Juno probe from Jupiter's orbit to intercept this object before it passes Jupiter, in which case we might have a much better idea as to what it is, or at least what type of comet it is, and how this comet differs from other comets that we might see within our own solar system. But if all of these things do not happen, if instead Avi Loeb's speculation about 3I Atlas happens to be true, and this object instead reduces speed and executes a reverse solar O-berth maneuver to instead begin maneuvering towards the Earth on a collision course, what might the consequences be? How could this be done, first of all, assuming that this object is under intelligent control, assuming that perhaps it's an artificial object disguised as a comet, or a comet with some technological modifications? How could this actually be accomplished? Do we understand the science behind that? And also, if it were on a collision course, could we stop it? And if not, what sort of damage would it do if it were to make impact? All of this and more coming at you on The Angry Astronaut right now. Good afternoon, alien enthusiasts, and welcome to another Angry Alien Bulletin here on The Angry Astronaut. Finally back on camera, still not 100% recovered. My leg is still a bit swollen, a little difficult to walk around on it, but nevertheless, it doesn't appear to be infected anymore, so I think I'm almost at the end of my recovery period. Very, very happy for that, and once again, thanks so much to all the well wishes I received from everyone during all these weeks that I've been recovering. So once again, time to talk about 3I Atlas, and I can understand the frustration of some of the spaceflight enthusiasts who are accustomed to this channel being mostly about spaceflight in the past, given all of the UFO kind of related or alien related content that I've been doing lately. I understand the frustration, but at the same time, this is a huge event, even if this object is just a comet. And really, I don't think that this object should be called just anything, because we are talking about the largest interstellar object that has ever passed through the solar system, at least the largest object that we have ever observed. Largest by far. This object simply should not be here. We're talking 10 kilometers at least in diameter, something this huge stumbling across our solar system purely by chance, given the size of the other interstellar objects that we've seen. The odds of this happening are infinitesimally small, and yet at the same time, here we are, it's happening, and we happen to be alive to see this happening. So yeah, this is a very big moment regardless of what 3I Atlas might be, and then a big moment for a variety of other reasons. Already, this object is demonstrating a number of characteristics that are just not typical to most comets. We're going to be covering all of that as the episode proceeds, but then the final thing that I'm going to be talking about, or the main point of this video, the main topic, is to discuss the possibility of an impact. What if Dr. Avi Loeb is right? What if this thing reduces speed at the ideal time when it's concealed from our view, essentially, by the sun, lost in the sun's glare, and then slingshots around the sun and heads on a collision course with our planet, making a beeline right for us? Well, first of all, what would be the motivations for an alien civilization to do this? It's something I think that needs to be discussed. Why would they invest all of this effort and all of this precision engineering that would be necessary to hurl even an ordinary comet? Just a comet being hurled with the appropriate velocity, trajectory, etc., and then have some sort of capability of slowing itself down, even if it were just a modified comet or a missile disguised as a comet. That would still be a massive investment. Why would an alien civilization even want to do that? Why would they be so bent on our destruction? We'll be talking about that. But in addition, we're also going to talk about the consequences of what happens if this thing actually makes contact. If an object of this size, a comet, let's just assume that it is a comet of this size hitting our planet, regardless of the location. We're actually going to look at a couple of different scenarios. One where the comet hits in the ocean and one where it impacts in the middle of a continent. And let me tell you something. In either case, it would essentially spell the end of our civilization and the vast majority of species on our planet. So here's the latest bizarre characteristic of 3I Atlas that makes this object even stranger than we once thought it was. What we're looking at right now is one of the best visual images that we ever got of Oumuamua. Yes, a much smaller object, and we didn't see it until it was well past its closest approach to Earth. But as you can see, the object varies in brightness, and the reason it does is because it is rotating, and it is much thinner than it is wide. That is how we know what its general morphology was. And as far as comets are concerned, cometary nuclei often show periodic variations of their brightness over time scales of hours usually, and sometimes days. Astronomers expect that to apply also to 3I Atlas, since it was classified by the Minor Planet Center as a comet. But of course, here's the problem. According to data gathered from the Rubin Observatory, a telescope specifically designed to study interstellar objects, 3I Atlas shows no variability on hourly timescales at all. Why is this the case? Well, either 3I Atlas is not rotating, which is a bit strange for a cometary nuclei, or the rotation of its nucleus is completely hidden from view inside a thick cloud of dust. But once again, why would this object be sheathed in this much dust while it's still this far away from the sun? There shouldn't be this much outgassing taking place at this kind of distance to create this thick of a cloak of dust. And also, even if it were happening, that means we would expect some sort of violent outgassing to be taking place, which means we should be able to detect the gases that created this outgassing in this cloud of dust, not just the dust itself. And yet, all of the spectrographic analyses that have been carried out of this object have detected nothing, no chemicals whatsoever. In addition, even though this object appears to have sort of a stubby tail, which has led astronomers to conclude that it absolutely has to be a comet, it seems to have a leading glowing halo rather than a trailing tail. That is a very unusual thing for a comet, to have its tail pointing towards the sun as opposed to away from the sun. Why is there a glow ahead of 3I Atlas? Once again, the explanation could be that the object is just not spinning, and so its day side is hot and its night side is cold, and as a result, any ice that accumulated on its surface during its freezing interstellar travel evaporated only at the front of the object facing the sun. However, we haven't detected any water vapor, any free oxygen, nothing to indicate that ice is sublimating, evaporating, whatever. This would would mean that the object's nucleus is not hidden behind a veil of dust, and so its diameter must be 10 to 20 kilometers to explain its brightness. And incidentally, the Vera C. Rubin Observatory seems to confirm this suspicion of Dr. Loeb's, that the object is about 10 kilometers in diameter, which creates a serious problem. 3I Atlas cannot be an object this size because the available rocky material in interstellar space can only deliver an object of this size to the survey volume of the Atlas Survey Telescope once every 10,000 years. Now, either we got really lucky, or there's another way that this could have happened. To avoid the mass budget problem is if 3I Atlas were intentionally delivered to the inner solar system through a fine-tuned trajectory. And as I've said in other videos, the trajectory of 3I Atlas does indeed have really rare features, just as we would expect for an object that was sent here by design. It lines up with the orbital plane of the inner planets, which has a likelihood of 0.2% and comes unusually close to Jupiter, Mars, and Venus during the same trip, with a likelihood of 0.005%. And this is what has led Dr. Loeb to speculate that this object might indeed be here by design, and it has also triggered the vast majority of the main scientific community and astronomers in general, saying that Dr. Loeb is behaving ridiculously, irresponsibly, and presenting absurd ideas, even though they always seem to dismiss the actual facts. Very seldom is it ever mentioned how unlikely it is that an object like 3I Atlas is passing through our solar system in the way that it is passing through the solar system. Very seldom is that ever mentioned in any article that attacks Dr. Loeb. But in any event, let's go ahead and continue. Now, first of all, assuming this is some sort of artificial object or a modified natural object, how would it work? How could an alien civilization make a comet or asteroid do what they wanted it to do? Well, one way would be to implant an engine or bury an engine on the comet or asteroid, an engine that's significantly more powerful than a conventional chemical rocket. One likely way to do this would be through a plasma drive, something that I've talked about a lot on this channel, perhaps magneto-hydrodynamic propulsion. That's actually something that would be very suitable on a comet because comets are loaded with water. Now, the engine that you're looking at right now is called the Vasimir, the Variable Specific Impulse Magnetoplasma Rocket, and it's a very efficient electric propulsion system that utilizes powerful electromagnetic fields to ionize and accelerate a propellant. That propellant can be a wide variety of substances. The more energy that you plug into it, the more powerful the electromagnetic field and more the plasma is heated. And the hotter the plasma is heated, the faster it goes out the nozzle of the engine. We're talking about propellant escaping the engine at velocities as great as 50 kilometers per second, or 10 times as fast as a conventional rocket engine, therefore making this 10 times as efficient as the engines that we use today, meaning they would have to use a lot less propellant in order to accomplish the same things. Now, of course, it would take a mammoth engine to maneuver and accelerate or decelerate a 10-kilometer diameter object, even if it were a comet that's a bit lighter than an asteroid because it's mostly comprised of ice. But once again, if you had a large enough fusion reactor generating enough power, there would be no limit to the amount of propellant you could put through this thing and therefore generate as much thrust as you needed to execute the necessary maneuvers that we've been talking about. And also, if an engine like this were applying braking thrust or maneuvering thrust to the object as it approached our solar system, that would explain why we're seeing a haze or halo ahead of the object, because the braking thrust would be applied in the direction of the sun as the thing tries to decelerate or tries to maneuver as it prepares to execute the necessary braking thrust to enter an Oberth maneuver orbiting our sun to put it on a collision course with our planet. So technologically, even with technology that we can understand and speculate about right now, as a matter of fact, the Vasimir engine is being worked on at this very moment by a company called Ad Astra, we could definitely see how an alien civilization could make this happen. But what would be their motivations? Well, unfortunately, that one is not difficult to figure out. For the last 70 or so years, actually longer than that, really, the human species has demonstrated that we are an aggressive, violent, and nuclear-armed species capable of committing the worst possible atrocities on our own kind, let alone what we might do to other species and other civilizations in nearby star systems. Not only that, we're also working aggressively on artificial intelligence. Should our artificial creation turn against us and take over our nuclear-armed civilization, that could potentially unleash a far more devastating and dangerous force on the universe. A machine civilization heavily armed with nuclear weapons, and who knows what else a civilization like that might be able to develop as time went on. Not only that, there's evidence to indicate that UAPs have taken a significant interest in our civilization when it comes to nuclear tests. A recent study released by Dr. Beatriz Villarroel and her team of astronomers have revealed that there apparently were numerous artificial objects in Earth orbit in the early to mid-1950s, before the time that humans began sending up our own satellites into orbit, and these objects appeared far more frequently when a nuclear test was imminent or immediately after a nuclear test took place, indicating that if there are aliens currently watching our civilization, as an increasing amount of evidence seems to suggest, they're taking a special interest in our nuclear armaments and what we might decide to do with them. That all being the case, I can see an advanced civilization definitely making the decision that our civilization is something to be wiped off the face of our planet before we can become a substantial threat to anybody else. And unfortunately, if this nightmare scenario turns out to be true, well, we have virtually no chance whatsoever of stopping this object from colliding with our planet if we discover that this is about to happen only a few months ahead of time. We possess no technology. Not even nuclear warheads would be capable of diverting an object like this, something this big, 10 kilometers in diameter, off its course before it could collide with our planet. So, all of that being the case, we need to at least look at what the consequences might be. And unfortunately, everything that I've talked about up to this point has been pretty grim, but the nightmare scenario of a 3I Atlas collision with our planet is the most cataclysmic thing I believe anybody could possibly imagine. It's along the same lines of the Chicxulub impact that wiped the dinosaurs and over 90% of all species off the face of the Earth, and very probably it would either completely destroy our entire civilization and make us extinct, or at least push our civilization back by several millennia. So for our first scenario, let's see what would happen if 3I Atlas were to impact in the Atlantic Ocean about 500 kilometers east of New York City, near 40 degrees north, 66 degrees west, and the water depth in that area is 1 to 200 meters deep. The explosion would release energy on the order of 2.9 times 10 to the 8th power megatons, 290 million megatons. The fireball created by this sort of impact would be beyond comprehension, consuming the entire Northeast in a gigantic fireball. And it gets even worse than that. The overpressure wave afterwards would be on the order of 80 pounds per square inch to all buildings along the east coast of the United States. This is the total destruction of all but heavily reinforced structures like bunkers and such, but steel frame buildings, including skyscrapers, would be pulverized. The shock wave would be accompanied by a blast wind exceeding 1,000 kilometers per hour, far more powerful than the most devastating tornado that would level all buildings, all trees, virtually everything down to the bedrock. And then, of course, you would have an earthquake as well, but all that would do is shake the debris around because everything would be utterly destroyed by all the other effects of an impact of this magnitude. Now, also, you'd be dealing with a crater approximately 100 to 150 kilometers in diameter out in the ocean and 20 to 40 kilometers deep. The impact would excavate the bedrock, creating a transient crater followed by collapse into a wider, shallower structure. And in the process, 10 trillion kilograms of material, water, sediment, rock, ash, etc., would be ejected, with about 10% of that reaching the stratosphere. At 500 kilometers away, New York would experience a rain of molten ejecta, 1 to 10 centimeter fragments, igniting fires and causing impact injuries, but of course, nobody would be alive to experience that. And then, after that, well, there would be a very short-lived inferno because a tsunami would come after that. Most tsunami simulations of an event of this magnitude suggest that wave heights would attenuate to 200 to 500 meters high by the time it reached the east coast of the United States, over 1,600 feet high. It would wipe out every major city on the east coast of the United States and devastate most cities in Western Europe as well, at least the ones close to the coast. As I mentioned before, a lot of debris would be hurled up into the atmosphere, and by the way, a lot of this debris, while still superheated, would come back down into the atmosphere with vast consequences for the entire planet, and then of course a nuclear winter that would follow after that. But we'll get to that after we look at our second scenario. Let's go ahead and do an impact pretty much in the dead center of the United States in Kansas City, Missouri. Well, in this particular case, the devastation is even more awful, at least for cities surrounding that immediate area. The force of the blast and the size of the crater would be similar, but look how big of an area is utterly consumed by the fireball. The entire center of the United States will be utterly devoured by an inferno, and it gets even worse than that. Once we get to the overpressure wave, the consequences to all cities surrounding that area become just awful, just almost impossible to even imagine. St. Louis, 380 kilometers away, has 110 pounds per square inch worth of overpressure that completely obliterates every single building in the city. Omaha, Nebraska has the same, in fact, even worse consequences at 270 kilometers away. Minneapolis, Minnesota at 660 kilometers, not quite as bad, but still at 45 pounds per square inch worth of overpressure damage. That causes most homes to collapse, and even high rises, skyscrapers are heavily damaged, and fires break out everywhere, along with a magnitude 7 earthquake. Chicago, Illinois, same distance, same cataclysm. And then Oklahoma City is even closer at 480 kilometers. Denver at 890 kilometers, even that far away, it's 25 pounds per square inch worth of overpressure wave damage, moderate to severe damage with homes heavily damaged. Some high rises survive, fires still breaking out everywhere. Dallas, Indianapolis, Memphis, Des Moines, all cities will be either destroyed or heavily damaged with tens of millions of deaths. And the global nightmare would just be getting started. For one thing, re-entering debris. Not all of this would go into the upper atmosphere. Actually, the majority of the particles and molten droplets would re-enter the atmosphere in the next 24 hours or so, radiating heat as they decelerated in the atmosphere, because this stuff would get blown up into suborbital space and then re-enter the atmosphere. Lots and lots of debris. We're talking nearly 1 trillion kilograms of the stuff, releasing enormous amounts of thermal energy, similar to the impact's fireball damage, and that would be distributed over the entire planet, causing a short-term increase in surface temperatures from between 5 to 20 degrees Celsius for a few hours, which would be sufficient to ignite wildfires globally, especially in forests, grasslands, and urban areas within 10,000 kilometers of the impact site. And exposed organisms like humans trapped in the open would suffer second to third degree burns, again, as far away as 10,000 kilometers from the point of impact. This would be a disaster truly of global levels. And it gets even worse than that, if you can imagine, because all of the debris thrown up into the upper atmosphere that doesn't come down immediately would practically blot out the sun, reducing temperatures by 10 to 20 degrees Celsius worldwide, destroying crops, wiping out food supplies, and leading to mass starvation for billions of people. This kind of temperature drop would render vast areas of both the northern and southern hemispheres completely uninhabitable. It would simply be too cold to support human life. And then, of course, in the equatorial regions where life might be able to continue, crop failures would be so devastating, especially if you consider the size of human population, that the extinction of our species would become a very real possibility. And these conditions would persist for years, and it would take hundreds of thousands of years for Earth's ecology to recover in any sort of recognizable way. You would be talking about hundreds of generations surviving just in the hope that future generations might have it a little bit better than they did. Human civilization, if it survived at all, would be set back centuries, if not millennia. You can see then why it's unnecessary for an alien civilization, if they are bent on our destruction, to utilize any sort of invasion fleet, death rays, or any other kind of method to wipe us out. Simply redeflecting a big enough rock and sending it on a collision course, given the fact that we are completely unprepared for that type of scenario, would be enough to ensure our complete destruction. Pretty grim scenario indeed. All I can say is that I hope that this is not what 3i Atlas is. To be honest, I doubt it. I think it's very unlikely that 3i Atlas is going to execute a maneuver like this, and this doomsday scenario may confront us at some point in the future. All of this is just speculative, but at the same time, I think it's only responsible for us to consider, what if it were true? What could we possibly do about it, given the fact that we have prepared very little for a scenario like this? We've made virtually no preparations for a scenario like this, especially if the dark forest hypothesis, where civilizations stay quiet intentionally because the galaxy is full of dangerous, sophisticated predators. If that is true, we will definitely be facing this scenario at some point in the future, given how we blast out our location on radio waves and our identity on a pretty regular basis, at least to anybody that happens to pass within about 100 or so light years of us. Only when we are confronted by something that's actually really dangerous are we going to do something about it. And as we have seen in this video, by that time, it will likely be too late. Thank you very much for watching. Also, let me let you know what we have coming up, what I have planned. I have a Patreon milestone. That doesn't mean it's just for Patreon subscribers. It's a Patreon membership milestone. If we can just get to half of 1% of subscribers being paying Patreon supporters, even at the $3 level, then I will do an all-day broadcast, 24 hours at some UFO hotspot, depending on where I am. I might be in Australia, the States, here in the UK, something like that. I will broadcast all day watching for UFOs, answering your questions, and also watching some UFO footage from around the world. We're in the process of collecting all of that right now to be part of the broadcast, an all-day marathon broadcast for UFO fans. So if you're interested in making that happen, in helping me get to that milestone, all the details are in the description. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, stay angry about space.